Hi everyone, welcome to the last episode of Jodi Dancers Talks for this series. Today we have Kuljit from the Open Minds Project. Hi Kuljit.
Hi.
Hello. Hello.
And we've left this for the last episode because we found it very interesting. Something people class as taboo, not really talk about, but here we are talking about it. And I think I want to start with it straight away. So we came across your page, Open Minds Project, and I want you to talk a little bit about why you started that page.
So the Open Minds Project, we started, it's almost like, I think about 2 years ago. And it was a kind of face-to-face group for Punjabi LGBTQ plus people. And we used to run it in London. It was kind of like a once a month group. It was really successful. And I really enjoyed running it. We were doing it with Sabat Sikhs and Taraqi. It was like a joint project. As a gay Punjabi man, it was like, it's good for me to be there. It's good for me to connect with other people. And then the pandemic happened. And so that kind of support group that we were running had to become something else. So, and the shame of it was that we just managed to run our first groups in Birmingham as well. So it was London and Birmingham. So pandemic happened, we managed to get some money. We thought, you know what, we need to take this service to the people if they can't meet us. So we used the money to create a page, an Instagram page, a website, and then we moved our groups to online. So since kind of summer last year, we've been running the Open Minds group as an online group, and it's been going from strength to strength.
So as you said, you referred to yourself as gay in one of your previous statements. The term gay itself, what sort of do you think connotations are around the word to start off with? I think because people are very uncomfortable sometimes using that word. What are your connotations around that word, especially in our community?
Yeah, so I mean, to be honest, I use that word because it's the easiest way to get people to like maybe understand what my life might be like. I think that when I was growing up, I never heard that word at home. So, you know, so my generation was probably a bit more traditional in some ways, because I'm almost 40 now. So when I was growing up, it was the kind of 80s and the 90s. And then, you know, relationships were really about getting married. And you just understood that as you were growing up. There was no internet until, you know, I was in my teens. So I first came across the word gay probably in my late teens. And for me, it was a word that explained my physical attraction to men rather than women. And for a lot of people, it also means like a lifestyle as well. So, you know, like a community. But in the Punjabi community, I never ever, and to this day, actually, it's rare to hear people saying that word. So it's kind of, I guess I'd say it's an English word. I've never heard an equivalent word in Punjabi. And the only times I've heard anything similar in Punjabi have been probably like negative words.
Derogatory in
So when you said like the word gay, for you, people will understand what your life was like or is like.
Yeah.
And obviously within the Asian culture, that being like a derogatory term or bad words associated with it. How did you find that growing up, and how did you understand what it meant to you and associate with it?
Yeah. So growing up, I think as someone with like dual heritage, so having the Sikh Punjabi side, and then having the English side as well, I knew that actually in both situations, being gay in most places was not good.
Yeah.
So you know, things have improved so much and things are much better for most people. But even now, I know that if I go out in the street and I'm holding hands with my partner, someone could attack me just for that one thing.
Yeah.
So and depending on where you are in the country and who's, you know, what kind of community you're in, you are more at risk or not at risk. So that fear of like being judged for your sexuality is still very present. But when I was younger, it was much more like you could feel it. So it wasn't only like in the streets. You'd maybe like worry about it at school. You'd worry about it when you were at work.
Yeah.
And I remember being at work, even as a doctor, when I was in my early stage of my career, one of my supervisors was very homophobic.
Yeah.
And he used to say stuff in meetings.
Mm.
And so it wasn't like you didn't really feel safe anywhere.
No.
Yeah.
So did you think that had an impact on your mental health growing up when during like work and hearing these comments?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think when you're a teenager, you want to find somewhere that you belong.
Mm.
And I think the tricky thing is if you can't even like name the community that you might belong to, you don't even know it exists, then it's, I think for a long time, I was like, there's something wrong with me.
Yeah.
That was like, for a long time, that was what I thought. And then when I realized I was gay, then I thought, wow, okay, so this whole part of the world has opened up for me. But then actually, I felt like I was a brown man in a white man's world.
Yeah.
So there was that kind of race element there as well. So I thought I would join a community, but actually I just realized there were other doors that were closed to me. So a lot of my 20s was trying to find that right place. And again, that's one of the reasons why the Open Minds Project, I think, is really great, because what we do is we just create the space and the time for other Punjabi people to meet.
Yeah.
We don't ever ask people, what's your sexuality, what's your gender choice. We say, well, this is a safe space. You don't have to worry about being shamed or being criticized for who you are here, and just chat to other people like in a kind of safe way. And that's definitely something I didn't have when I was growing up.
Then we talk about society and norms. And obviously, from what you're saying, it was a struggle in terms of conforming to societal norms, but also then it raises the question of identity. Like every time you go, obviously, that has a massive impact on your mental health. So either you go out and you assume that if you're a bloke, you're straight. If you're female, you're straight. You're attracted to the opposite gender. What kind of impact have you found with yourself and with people in your groups that identity has on mental health? What kind of impact does that have?
So I think one of the hardest things that people talk about is this idea of, it's the fear of being rejected by the people that you love. And the problem is that it doesn't always mean that that fear is going to be true. So it doesn't mean that when you tell people that they're going to reject you, but that fear can really, really have a toxic effect on people's lives and the way they see themselves and the way they see their future. And for some people, that toxic fear has come true. So they've told the people that they love and they've rejected them, or they've abused them, they've thrown them out of the family, they've disconnected with them. So it's a really tricky thing, that identity thing, because I think for most people, what they want to do is they want to belong with people that understand them. And when we're growing up, we think and we hope that our family will understand us and help us belong with them. But for someone who's different, the biggest fear is that you'll tell someone and they'll reject you. So I think in terms of identity, that kind of really unstable sense of like, for some people, it's like they told their parents and they got kicked out of the house. And I've definitely spoken to people who've said that, they told their parents and then they were cut off from their family. And there was a huge safety issue of if they stayed there, they could be at risk.
And then we're more delving into now like the culture, Punjabi culture, like South Asian culture. I think there's a lot of interlinking situations between South Asian and Punjabi culture. And the few things I want to start with, but the first thing I want to begin with is this. With regards to communicating, like obviously you must have told your parents at some point. What kind of barrier do you think there is from your own experiences? What kind of barrier do you think there is for children, young adults, communicating with their parents about their sexuality?
So my experience of Punjabi culture is that we don't give people the language to talk about difficult things. So things like mental health, things like even physical health. If someone's got cancer, I've seen that in my extended family. They don't know how to bring that up because there's a really tricky thing of like telling someone something really personal. You don't want to burden someone with your kind of like problem, but also you want to tell them because they're close to you. So I think we have a lot of practice at celebrations, for good or for bad, or used to. And you know, we can be around each other a lot and have a lot of like fun times. But when something bad happens, like a relationship breakup, or even just like tension in a relationship, often people feel alone because they just don't know how to approach that conversation. And a lot of that is because when we're growing up, my experience of growing up in Punjabi culture is we celebrate the good. Sometimes the good isn't always the kind of there's stuff like achievements, so like educational achievements, or like, you know, getting good jobs and that kind of stuff which gives us status. But even those things, often they're like quite specific things. So sometimes it's not just getting a car, it's getting the best car. It's not just having a wedding, it's having the best wedding. And it's about showing. And I think the funny thing about South Asian culture, what I'm realizing in the work that I do with these groups, is that in the UK we have a very specific type of South Asian culture. And if you go to like Punjab and you go to an equivalent family of equivalent kind of earning, that actually sometimes they might be more liberal about some things. And so what happened was, you know, that idea of like when our parents and their generations above migrated, they took their ideas from then, brought them here, and they didn't change at the same rate. So I think Punjabi culture, and even like geographically, so Punjabi culture in Birmingham versus Punjabi culture in Southall versus in Southampton, where I am at the moment, they're all different.
Yeah.
And you feel it when you're there. When you're there, you realize, oh wow, you know what? There's some things that are similar, but there are a lot of things that are different. So I think the identity thing is really difficult because the closer and closer you look at things, the more you realize, like, if you have the time and you look at everyone's stories, they're all quite different from each other. But the big themes, I think, going back to your question about language, I think we haven't quite worked out a way yet to have those hard conversations.
So, sorry, yeah, not just language now. Do you think there are other barriers within the culture? So let's say, for example, like we're a Bhangra team, okay?
Yeah.
I've not come across anyone that's identified as LGBTQ as a Bhangra dancer, or LGBTQ as a Punjabi singer, musician, whatever. Do you think there are other barriers apart from language that's stopping people from possibly, like you said, opening those doors which have been closed previously?
Yeah, I mean, I guess there are lots of different ways you could think about those barriers. I mean, we talked a little bit about the kind of like internal barriers. So, you know, like fear of shame, fear of being rejected. And then we talked about language. But I think there is also a responsibility on people in the community who are not from that group to kind of show people that it is safe. Because I think some of it, so for example, I know this is happening now because I've spoken to younger Punjabi LGBTQ people, and they're saying, some of them are saying, my parents were okay with it. My parents said as I was growing up that it's okay for whatever you are, you can just be as you are. So I think things are changing, but sometimes if I use another example of thinking about some of the attitudes towards the difference between men and women. So if you're a woman that really likes to play a lot of sports, or if you're a man that doesn't like to play a lot of sports and doesn't like to drink. So when you go to environments where they're mainly women or mainly men, it's very uncomfortable when you want to be something different in those spaces. And it doesn't take much for one or two of those people to say, you know what, it's all right if you don't want to drink. It's all right if you don't know anything about football. Or it's all right if you really know loads about football and you want to mix. So I think the responsibilities are, they're as much in the community as they are on the individual. And because some people might be all right with it, the idea of it, they might be, you know, like live and let live. But if you don't tell people, then the person who's experiencing it is going to assume that you don't like it, because that's the kind of, especially when you're growing up, that's kind of what you think. You think everyone's going to just hate me for who I am. And I think if more people said, you know what, it doesn't matter who you love and who you want to be intimate with, that's your business. and as long as you're, you know, a good person,
Yeah.
you know, and I like you and whatever, you know, we're friends, whatever, then that's fine. But again, I think that idea about status is the other kind of like really difficult thing in Punjabi culture, because for me, for a long time, the idea that me not getting married to a woman meant, I knew it, that what it meant was it did something very strange to my sense of what my status of my family might be. And you get that weird double pressure then, because you're like, okay, so I need to show that I'm living in a way that doesn't bring my parents down in their community.
Yeah.
So not only do you feel guilty about being different, you then feel guilty about putting your family under pressure.
Yeah.
And for some people, they're like, you know, so if I come out as gay, then my sister might not be able to get married.
Yeah.
Because people are going to say, oh, you know, her brother is gay, whatever. What kind of family is that?
Yeah.
You know, weird kind of like things that come out of, and to explain them to someone outside of Punjabi communities, they're like, that doesn't make any sense.
No.
But for us, it's real.
Well, that's the thing. Like, so from when you were growing up and to your sessions now, do you feel there has been that shift in the community attitude, and people are more welcoming when they come and speak to you? Like, do they feel more comfortable and open to be able to do that without having fear of a stigma, for example?
I'd like to say yes,
Hmm.
but I think going back to your point about what we see in Punjabi culture, the visual culture. So, you know, you listen to your Bhangra songs, you go to your events, whatever, and they're still culture is generally very much seen through men's eyes.
Yeah.
And straight men's eyes, and a very particular kind of straight Punjabi man, who is quite macho, quite, you know, like the hero. You know what I mean? That kind of like, you know, mucha and everything, you know, just like and the weird thing of like drink and whatever, and I think, you know, some of it is a shame, because when you think about some of the difficulties that, you know, for example, with the farmers in Punjab, and, you know, suicides in Punjabi culture, in Punjab, in farmers, has been high for a long time. But when do you ever hear people talking about suicide? They're all here.
Yeah.
And so there's a real barrier, I think, in knowing that something's a problem, but changing it. And I think the LGBT stuff is one of those things that everyone knows it happens. And if you think about it, you probably do know people that are from that community. But if they haven't felt comfortable to tell you, then there is still something a bit strange going on. So yeah, I think there have been changes, I think, in some generations, but until we get, you know, your big singers, your big kind of like culture makers, who are able to say, you know what, either I'm from this community or you can be from this community, and it's no one's business. That's when we'll start seeing that change.
And then bring on to your question that a lot of this is from a specific man's point of view, which it genuinely is, the culture is. I want to ask you if you've had experience of this within your groups or not. Looking at it from a woman's perspective, so like a woman's sexuality. So gay doesn't necessarily mean a male attracted to a male. It could be the L in LGBTQ. So have you had an experience of women struggling to come out?
Yeah, so I remember we ran a group with a topic about women, and I guess women's point of view, probably about a year ago. And the funny thing is that a lot of the gay, so I guess what we would call cisgendered gay men, so men who are born as looking as men and then become gay, or are gay when they're born. They even struggle to understand some of the difficulties that women face in Punjabi culture, because I think the traditional view of, and I'm talking as a man again, but women have to put up with so much from such a young age. And for women, my experience of what that group was telling me is that even in that space, which was supposed to be inclusive, they didn't feel safe enough always to speak their mind. And I remember at that time there was one or two women who were talking about having a women's only group, so kind of like a queer only women's group, and that would have been amazing if we had the resources and the time to do that, or if one of them had it would have been great to run it. At the moment, we haven't been able to do that. And I think there is a safety issue, even for women from LGBTQ plus communities, to be able to talk about things for themselves. Because there are some differences, you know, there are things about reproduction, there are things about the safety, and all kinds of very particular things that are different. And again, if you think about it in terms of like wider Punjabi culture, there isn't enough diversity in terms of role models yet.
Yeah.
And often what happens is you get women who I think sometimes, I don't know, I think some of sometimes you end up with a woman who's doing similar things to the man, and you get quite like a flat version of, you get a Punjabi woman, a Punjabi man, and in the song they might be quite similar. But then when you look about how they're living their lives, often, you know, when they're doing the cut scenes in these videos to women, so the women are chatting with the women, doing women's things, and often the clothing as well tells us a lot. And obviously I love the colors of traditional clothes, but you know, I think if you think about a big singer, and if they turned up wearing a lenga, a man wearing a lenga, you know, a lenga that fit him, that was made for him, and that, you know, he looks stunning in, maybe in his bedroom. If you imagine he turned up wearing that in a video, and how the people around you watching that video might react, that tells you a little bit about where our culture is at the moment.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, it's just clothes.
Yeah.
It
has a big impact. So
yeah.
And then tying this back into mental health, there are various parties that get affected by it. So let's take parents of the children, for example, as well. So we've talked a bit about the anxiety, fear of coming out, but what kind of impact does it have on parents' mental health? Because like we said, there's a language gap, there's a cultural gap. But what kind of impact does that? Because there'll still be an essence of a shock when someone comes out and says to their parents that I'm this or that. Yeah.
I think the thing that I try and say to people now is something I learned through my own experience, is, and that you read about as well. Like for me, when I told my parents I was 23 or 24, and it'd taken me my whole life up until that point to understand what I was and who I was. And at the time, I expected them to be able to process all of that information very quickly.
Yeah.
So I think that now, like looking back on it, I don't think we could have done anything differently, but I wish I just understood that it would have taken them longer.
Yeah.
And it did take, they took it in initially, but they couldn't verbalize it. So my dad went completely silent for like, he didn't talk to anyone for 2 weeks. Like anyone in the house, he just didn't, you know. And I think again that tells us about, you know, so he didn't have the language to be able to, and also he didn't have the practice, because everyone could see he was upset, but nobody knew, he didn't know how to say it and feel safe to be able to say it in the family house. And also we didn't know how to ask him. So, you know, there was that fear of what will come out. So, and my mum went the other way. She kind of, I think she went into denial a little bit. And it took years for it to come to what it is now, which is just a kind of really normal situation. So I think the thing about the language, you're right, goes two ways. So one is the difficulty explaining what's going on for us. And I think about things like depression and anxiety as well. So when I was in my early 20s, I'm sure I was depressed at points because of this and because of other things. But I don't know how I would have said that to my parents.
Yeah.
I could have relied on them. I relied on them for other things. So when I was at uni and I was short of money, they would give me a bit of money, whatever. And so they would look after me in that way. But if I'd gone to them and said to them, you know, my mental health isn't right, I don't think they would have understood. And in a way, it would have been, it's not the right thing, but me not telling them was a way of like kind of not opening up something that'd be quite painful.
Yeah.
And maybe if I'd opened it up then, maybe now we would be able to talk about it.
Yeah.
But again, you know, that's kind of hindsight. So I think the way I imagine it is, these kind of conversations, they're like wounds. So they're like, so if you touch them, it'd be painful.
Yeah.
And we don't have as much experience about showing each other our wounds and not feeling like someone's going to react badly.
Yeah.
So, and when you're depressed or when you're anxious, you feel so vulnerable. It's really difficult to open that door and say, look, see what's cut inside me.
Yeah.
And help me heal.
Yeah.
And actually healing is, again, it's like a word I don't really hear so much about in conversations, when someone's sick. Normally it's just get over it.
Yeah.
Or they'll get over it.
Yeah.
Keep positive or whatever.
Well, that's interesting. Obviously, in terms of, firstly, when you say explaining it to your parents, when you realize, but then how did you find the process of when you found a partner, to tell them? Did the same sort of feelings come back, like anxiety, and how did they react to that? Was it the same sort of process again, or were they able to take it in better and quicker this time?
So when I basically, with my partners, because they've met, we've never talked about it, but they've met at least two. So this, they met. I think they met two partners before. No, one. They met one of my ex boyfriends when they came to a music concert that I was in, and luckily that didn't work out. Hopefully he doesn't watch this. And what I did actually was I hacked the system. So I knew that my parents were they wouldn't be able to see what was obviously in front of them.
Right, okay.
Because they just wouldn't look for it. So that guy got to see them and meet them, but at the time they never would have thought that was my boyfriend.
Okay.
And when they met my civil partner, and we've been together since I was 25.
Don't get yourself in trouble.
I know, I never remember. I never remember. And you know what? It's Valentine's week this weekend, and I always forget. And he always buys me something, and I always forget. But yeah, we've been together for a very long time. And when did they first meet? So they would have first met, I think he would have come round to stay quite maybe a couple of years into the relationship, but they had met him at our place before. So I remember that. I remember a really awkward dinner of having them round and my brothers, and just being really uncomfortable. But I knew somewhere in my head. So what I knew is my parents, so again, going back to this point about them not being able to talk about hard things, I knew they wouldn't bring it up because it was too much.
Yeah.
But also I knew that they cared about me enough to come to the dinner.
Yeah.
And what my hope was that over time they would relax and we would relax. And to be honest, that's what's happened.
That's good.
They've seen more and more of us together. It's just become a more normal thing. I always think that one of the things they found difficult was they couldn't imagine what our future would look like.
Yeah.
And they worried that I was going to be unhappy or, just like lonely or whatever. So I think they've just realized this is just like a normal relationship in a lot of ways. Yeah, quite boring.
That's really nice to hear.
Yeah, it's a good story. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, and then I want to bring it back because I remember you said something a bit earlier on about it's not just the individual's action of who is in the LGBTQ community, it's people on the outside. So obviously you've opened up this platform now with the Open Minds Project, by encouraging people to come and speak openly. Do you still think there's a bit of hesitation on part of the people that are still in the community to come forward and still speak openly? Do you think that hesitation is still there?
100%. So every month we get so last month we had, I think, about 20 people sign up for the group. And then on the day we had maybe 10 people turn up. And it was great having 10 people. 10 people was a lot as well. But I think for a proportion of the people who want to come, you see some of them sign up like a lot of months. but they don't turn up. And I think so, and they obviously want that connection, and they're obviously curious. And I know for a fact, because some people have sent me messages, that they want to come, but they're also worried about being found out. So
could that them fear they might see someone or recognize someone that knows their family, something like that?
Yeah, I think there's that, and then there's also this thing of like someone might. So I know that, I think it is a lot about being recognized, but it's also, I think it's about being seen and trusting other people. Yeah. So what if someone is like a bad apple in the group, and he takes your information or your story and does something with it. Yeah. So again, that's that idea of that kind of like that internal fear that we have of the world. The world is going to treat us badly, and then we kind of take it around and we kind of like see it everywhere. So, you know, it's got I flip it around the other way. So why should they trust this group? You know, when maybe in their life there's not that many people that they can trust.
And then to sum it up and finish it off for this part specifically, where do you see Open Minds Project going? What is your future goal for this project?
So our main aim is to just keep creating the space. And in the like big picture, it would be amazing if we didn't need it. It'd be amazing that if in the future we didn't need it. I'm hoping that if we can keep the group running every month, that eventually people will just start feeling okay. I mean, I say this, but a lot of people who come to the group are pretty solid in themselves. They know who they are, and they're pretty fierce with it. And I think the best thing about the group is that I always leave it thinking, you know what, there's a community out there for me. And there are more of us. And I think whenever I say that to the group, that there are more of us out there, often I get a message of people saying, you know what, that made me feel really good. And I think what I forget, because now I'm a bit older and I've been doing this for a while, is that even for me, if I had to leave this area where I live now in this house and go back to the Punjabi community that I grew up in, it wouldn't take that much time for me to start feeling different again. Yeah. Because even in my family, not in my immediate family, but my extended family, there isn't space for that difference. So my solution to it for a long time was just take myself out of it. Yeah. So the other bit that we need to do, and we need to work out a way, is how can we work with the community? Yeah. So that kind of outreach work. So how can we go and speak to groups of regular Punjabi people and say, we're here, this is what we are, and you know, let's have a chat. And I think if we can do that, we can also start contributing to that situation where people can just have more open, frank conversations about things. Because we all need to be doing that. I think by showing people that it's okay to have difficult conversations, it then helps them have that next difficult conversation. Yeah. So that's in our long-term vision, that's one of the goals. We want to start having some of those more difficult conversations.
But no, I think it's good. I think it's good what you're doing. You've created it's not a start. It's you're plugging in a grey area, and it's allowing people to have that space. So I think start doesn't do it justice, the word start. I think what does it justice is create a platform where there's a space that needs to be filled in, and it's better to be filled in by people who professionals are supportive, who know what they're talking about. And I think your background lends itself to that, your page lends itself to that. And I think the work that you're doing, hopefully, like you said, will lead to more people being more open about in the community. And I do share your vision as well. I do want people to be more open about their identity, because ultimately it does have an impact on their mental health.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's a much better environment for all of us. Yeah. If we can be like, you know what, we all have bad days. Yeah. There's always more to us than you might see. Yeah. That kind of rounder, fuller picture of all of us, I think we would just all be happier. So I think I'm hoping that the next generations coming through are just going to be a bit more relaxed with that kind of idea.
And hopefully, I agree, hopefully as we get on with generations at a time, hopefully it becomes more safer. I think safe is a good word, because then it reduces that fear of anxiety, the stress of, like you said, you don't want to be holding hands with your partner walking down the street and get verbally abused or something. And that's sort of society we don't really want to be.
It would be nice for it just to not be a taboo subject.
Exactly.
That's it.
And on that note, Kuljit, I do want to thank you for your time. It's been really interesting. And hopefully, if people are experiencing issues that have personally affected you in this episode, please contact Open Minds Project. Kuljit, I'm sure, is more than happy to respond to any messages on Instagram. And we'll put any contact details below as when we get them. So thank you for your time, Kuljit.
Fantastic. And thank you for the work you're doing. So yeah, thank you for inviting me.
No problem. Thank you.
All right. Thanks.
Bye.